G'day YouTube, this is Necro Arcanus XIII in association with Bandit 1569, bringing you the next chapter in Book 1 of the Crusade Chronicles, Hell's Crusade. If you haven't watched chapters 1 through 4 yet, then do so now to avoid spoilers. Now, this episode is going to be another two-parter, namely chapters 5 and 6, because chapter 5 is actually really short, but in contrast, Chapter 6 is really long. So yeah. Previously on Hell's Crusade, as new arrival Bailey arrives to help rebuild John's house into a resistance base for the rebels, Adele is pursued by soldiers and John and his boys track her down to a forest on the edge of town, where they end up finding the results of the Empire's nuclear testing roam free. Raziel is injured and knocked unconscious rescuing Adele from an otherwise fatal fall from a cliff. And when things couldn't get any worse, John's phone rings only to run out of battery the second he receives the call, leaving him to think that something is actually going to get worse. This is Chapter 5, No Place Like Home. The group managed to walk back to the miner's side and to recover the bike. Vincent was carrying Raziel and laid him down in the back seat. John jumped into the driver's seat and started up the engine, and the bike seemed to reflect the general vibe of those around it, as it only spluttered into life instead of roaring. Everybody else jumped into the back seat and left the legs dangling over the side so that there was enough room for Raziel. As the bike slowly pulled out of the driveway, John turned to glance at a disheveled plaque mounted on the side of the monument. Then he sighed and pushed the bike in full gear, speeding off into the night. Adele looked up at the clouds. The darkness would have been relaxing if it wasn't for the rain that was pounding down on them all. "I hate the rain," commented Dante. "Is your hair messing up?" joked Vincent. Silence followed. "You're too quiet. Strange." Dante turned around to face his brother. "After today, I'm just too tired to argue," he said. Vincent turned to pet Saberfang. Then he noticed that Adele was staring at the gemstones embedded in her ankle bracelet. "That nice bracelet," commented Vincent. "Where'd you get?" Adele turned to Vincent. "My sister found it in the woods when we were little. She didn't want it, so she gave it to me. I've never taken it off since then. It was only 2 days before I lost her." "You see her again, I'm sure," replied Vincent. "Christ says there's hope." "Where did you pick that up?" asked Dante. "The other day I was walking past church. Priest said I looked sad. I say I'm not smart. Priest says there's hope. Jesus says so." "That's nice of you to have some faith, Vinny," commented Saberfang. "It's true. I made cross out of sticks and twine. I keep it under pillow, remind me what Priest said. I didn't say anything because I thought Dante'd make fun." John stopped the bike to let a car pass by. Then he used the moment to turn to Vincent. "I don't really mind you having belief in something," he said, "just as long as you don't join any of them murder cults or anything like that." John started up the bike again and drove off. "Why would I do that?" asked Vincent. "You say people who kill people for fun is bad. You say people should only kill people to defend, if there's no other way." "Then I raised you well." By now the bike was almost home, and John noticed strange lights in the distance. He boosted the speed of the bike and hurried home, but once he was in the street, he saw that large military vans were parked outside. There was a soldier at the front door, trying to knock it down. John stopped the bike in the middle of the road, and then he jumped out. "You lot stay here," he said. "I'll check it out." Keeping to the shadows, and using trees and abandoned houses as cover, John sneaked up to the bathroom window of his own house, and he scraped at the paint in the windowsill to reveal a small lock. Then he dug around in the dirt and found a screwdriver, which he used to pick it. Once the window was open, he climbed in and looked around, avoiding soldiers' flashlights through the window. Then called out in a whisper, "Brian! Bob! Bagger, you there?" "John," came the reply. He quickly turned around to see the 3 men hiding behind the minibar, and he ducked between them to avoid a flashlight. "Where the hell were you?" out Brian. I tried to call you but you didn't answer. A, you will believe me if I told you. B, my battery's dead. C, what the fuck's going on here? The bloody soldiers looking for Bob. They're checking the houses of everyone currently associated with it. I'll hide you lot in the basement then. Where is the basement? Oh, Barry, we've already looked for some place to hide. Just under this mattress, replied John. Why is there a mattress on the floor here? Cyberpunk needs a bed as well. Carefully, the four managed to wedge their feet between the mattress and the wall so that the weight was not on it. John lifted the mattress up edgewise and put out several floorboards to reveal a staircase. Squeeze through the gap there should be a door at the bottom of the stairs. I'll sneak back out and divert the attention. All goes well, kids will be back to let you out and help defend the house. Also, don't touch anything. The noises down there are amplified for some reason, I don't know why. The guys nodded and sneaked down the hole. John replaced the floorboards and put the mattress back down, and just as the guards managed to break down the door, John had gone back out of the window in the bathroom and locked it. He then made his way back to the bike and started it up. We need to get them guards away from the house, he said. We need distraction, and you can get into the house, kill anyone there, and get the guys out of the basement. Sounds quite a down there. Dante suddenly came up with an idea. You drive an older Strat, the rest of you drag Raz inside. Good idea, said Bill. Your attitude will do wonders when it's planned, and I'm not being sarcastic about this for once. Everybody assumed their positions, with John in the driver's seat, Dante in the back seat, and everybody else waiting in the nearby tree. John revved the engine as loudly as possible and he called out to Dante, You ready? You bet, came the reply. Let's go then. Oh, and Dante. What? For the love of God, do not be a straight. Got it. The bike suddenly tore up the road and turned around a corner. Then John slowed down the bike so that Dante would do his thing. Hey soldiers, he called out. With one quick movement, Dante reached out his katana and impaled the first soldier in range through the head. And as the bike drove past, Dante ripped out the soldier's head with half the neck still attached. Dante then produced his middle fingers on both hands and raised his arms high. Then proceeded to dance back and forth on the seat, seeing hairs in the air, waving like you just don't care. The other soldiers dashed into their vans and attempted to follow John and Dante. The trucks failed to start at first, but they eventually squealed into life and raced after the bike. Nearby, Saberfang and the kids were making their move. Just give me a second to put my bracelet on, replied Adele. I'll carry Brazil inside, added Saberfang. Vincent, if there's any soldiers inside, grind their bones to make your bread. Vincent laughed, because I'm giant. The group dashed inside through the shattered door. The lone soldier who was inside was terrified at the sight of a 7.5-foot tall Vincent smashing his way to him. Vincent wound up a heavy punch that sent the soldier flying into the wall at high speed, shattering his internal organs on impact. The only clear sign of this occurring was the blood that poured out of the soldier's helmet as the cavity left inside overflowed. Saberfang then came inside with Brazil on his back and tossed him onto the couch. Adele came in last and opened the basement to let Luke, Bailey and Brian out. Luke had his gun in his hand, which signified that he was ready to help defend the house. Brian looked out of the window. Another van in sight, he said. John must have made a perfect distraction. Actually, said Vincent, who was pushing buttons on his phone with the edge of his fingernail due to the size of his hand. Dante did distraction. I caught it on camera with phone. He called everybody over to watch, and within a minute, Luke was in hysterics over Dante's act. Thunder rolled as Luke laughed like a maniac. Well, that was creepy, commented Bailey. The bike could be heard coming up the road, and only a single van was left in pursuit. Luke opened the window and opened fire on the van. The first 5 shots missed completely, but lightning cracked the sky wide open as the final bullet hit 2 of the tyres dead centre and bursting, causing the van to flip over frontways. The vehicle would have crushed Dante if it were not for the fact that it jumped up and kicked off of the roof to push the vehicle away. Then Dante landed on solid ground and walked away from the ensuing explosion. John pulled the bike into the garage and ran inside to get out of the rain. Once everyone was inside, Luke congratulated Dante for his dastardly plot. That was excellent, he gasped. I know, yawned Dante as he stretched his arms. Might as well hit the showers. At that moment, he heard water running and noticed that Adele had beaten him to it. "Well, shit," he said. "Let her go," said John. "She's had a hard enough day already." Dante pointed at his sleeping twin. "What about Veggie Boy here?" "If Raziel vegetable," said Vincent, "why is he not growing in dirt?" "If someone's a vegetable, Vincent," replied John, "that means they're in a coma. Then again, if Raz is a vegetable, Dante's a fruit." Everybody except for Dante cracked up laughing. "I get that one," commented Vincent, "because he's girly." Dante scoffed and walked away. "I don't know about you," said Luke, "but I could use a tall frosty right about now." "Beers in the fridge," replied John. "Unless you have your own still down there," said Brian. "With the prices of luxury nowadays, homegrown beer's a good idea." John exclaimed in agreement and walked over to the fireplace. "Shit, I've got no matches left." "Can't you just use your dark matter manipulation thingy?" asked Bailey. "And how the fuck do you know?" asked John. "Brian told me." John thought about it, then agreed to give it a try. "I don't often use magic for simple household tasks," he said. "If you have a talent, you shouldn't abuse it." John pointed his finger at the dry wood in the fireplace, and a small stream of liquid fire, like a lit trail running up the stream of a Lincoln gas tank, burst out of John's finger and ignited the wood. "Then again," he continued, "small things like this will be useful to train in magic, allow us to get used to using it. And just for the record, I said dark energy." At that moment, Raziel strained to wake up and fell off of the couch in the process. He managed to climb to his feet and stand up, only to sit back down. "I see you're awake," said John. Luke appeared in the doorway and tossed John a bottle of rum. John then sat down next to Raziel and handed him the bottle. "Drink this," he said. "The alcohol will open your blood vessels and relieve some of that headache of yours." Raziel leaned back to take a big swig, then John snatched the bottle back off of him. "Save me some at least." Raziel said nothing but gripped his head. "Welcome to my morning," said John. Brian then sat down on the chair opposite John. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "What?" "You wanted this big elaborate plan to take on the Empire, so what's it gonna be?" John looked outside as the storm raged on. "We might as well wait until morning," he said. "My mind's completely useless past 9. Everybody agreed, then searched for a place to sleep. The normal members of the household went to their own bedrooms, leaving the guests to sort out their own arrangements. And that was the end of chapter 5. As I said, it was really short. But once I throw in chapter 6, it's going to make up for some of the time. So here it is, chapter 6, Drowned Knight. In the morning, Dante awoke early. His hair was a tangled mess, and his coat was missing. He could hear the rain bearing down upon the roof like a concert entirely comprised of drummers. He entered the lounge room to discover that Bailey was sleeping on the couch. Brian was using 3 chairs placed in a row as a makeshift bed, and Luke was curled up in front of the fireplace. A near-empty beer bottle was laying on the mantelpiece and was dripping down into his throat. It was unclear whether this was on purpose or it was just a happy accident. Dante looked around to find his coat, and he found it hanging on the bathroom doorknob with a note pinned to it which said, "There's no hot water. The storm broke the boiler." Dante stamped the ground in frustration, and it woke up Saberfang in the process. Saberfang noticed that Dante was too focused on the note, and so he slipped into the bathroom and shut the door behind him, causing further annoyance from Dante. His shouting seemed to have alerted the others, as Vincent's giant arm forced its way through the wall and grabbed Dante by the neck, shaking him violently before dropping him to the ground. Saberfang then quickly exited the bathroom and trotted like a horse to the kitchen. As Dante went into the bathroom, Raziel and Vincent appeared outside. "I don't know about you," said Raziel, "but I'm starved." "Too true," replied Vincent. "All day chasing Adele, all night fighting army men, no time to eat." "You go on first, I'll find us something." Vincent nodded and grunted in agreement. When Dante came out of the bathroom, Raziel followed him to the kitchen. It had the most basic of facilities, apart from a mini fridge on the bench as well as a normal one, and Bailey was peering inside of the regular fridge next to the counters. "Is there nothing but beer in here?" he asked. "Only that one," replied Raziel. Dante rushed past Raziel to a mini fridge in the corner of the counter. Raziel tried to peer past Dante to see what was available, and Dante pulled out a half-empty tin of dog food, much to Bailey's shock. "Is that all?" he asked. "Looks like it," replied Raziel. "Normally it's just for Fang, but we need what we can get. What about your fried chicken Fridays? Where does that come from?" Dante slammed the tin on the counter and jammed a fork into it. "Well, thanks to Mum working on Mars as a scientist, she makes a Vincent-sized buttload of money every month. Once it gets wired to Dad, he uses some of it to bribe a KFC supplier to take his route through here on Thursday." Dante lifted the fork out of the tin, and a large gelatinous glob of ooze ran between the prongs of the fork, much to the disgust of Bailey and Raziel. "I'll go to the shop," said Bailey, finding something a bit more edible. "I'm just trying to stay alive," replied Dante. Bailey left the room, his face slightly pale. And while Dante was hesitant about eating the dog food, he could not avoid meeting Raziel's demonic gaze. "You're seriously going to eat the dog food?" asked Raziel. "Yes, I'm going to eat the dog food." "I'm sure it will taste lovely then." Raziel could not contain his nausea and heard a car engine start. Taking one last look at Dante, he ran out of the door shouting, "Bailey, wait up!" Dante shook his head and started meditating on the glob of food on the fork. "This is not dog food," he said. "This is succulent prime rib with a dessert side dish of spaghetti with sour cream and chives made of licorice strips, chocolate shavings, and melted mint ice cream sauce." Dante closed his eyes tightly and placed the dog food into his mouth. The instant it hit the taste buds, Dante's face was grotesquely disfigured more hideously than any living being could imagine. His skin turned purple as he tried to choke down the dog food, and eventually he could not take it anymore and promptly vomited a massive pool that ate through the floorboards wherever it spread. He then collapsed to the floor, foaming at the mouth, and Saberfang merely walked up and began chuckling to himself at the sight. "Now I know why you lick your own balls," moaned Dante. Saberfang plodded off, seemingly proudly, and a moment later John's booming voice could be heard rattling through the house in a disappointed tone. "Did he try to eat the dog food again?" John and Brian poked their head through the doorway to survey the damage. "Ah, he'll be right," said John. "I won't worry about the floorboard. I was going to take the house down once the rain stopped." "Really?" asked Brian. "No shitting. I already got tents packed up and all ready to take outside. I've been studying my maps. It turns out this house is going to take up the whole bloody block. The garage at least 1/8. The rest is just odd yards." "What about those random bits marked on the map?" asked Brian. "Well, this bit's just a special water boiler system to accommodate older water facilities. Basically, everyone can have a shower and not have the water go cold." "Well, what about the rest of it?" "Well, mostly solar panels, wind turbine, and prototype ideas for self-defense systems. I ain't going to go into detail on them unless I can confirm whether or not they'll work." At that moment, the storm started to ease. "Well, just in time," he said. "We'll be able to begin construction as soon as Raz and Baz get back." John wandered outside to watch the clouds dissipate, and the blue station wagon pulled into the driveway. Raziel and Bailey emerged, each with a large bag of shopping in each handful of actual food. "Where the fuck did you get all that?" asked John. "Woolworths," replied Bailey. "I thought only the soldiers had access to fresh food. All government workers, civilian or military, are given that access." Of course, Raziel couldn't come in, but he stopped a drug addict from stealing the wagon and selling it to a friend for meth. "We'll put the shopping away, then we'll come out and help build." The pair did just that, and when Raziel came back outside, John stopped him in his tracks. "What did you do?" "About that woman," replied Raziel. "I just held my talons in the air and she backed off. Should have seen the state she was in though. Had I not her heart, I would have killed her on the spot in cold blood. Then again, I would have rather done that than let her suffer. John held a grim expression on his face. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do, he said. John allowed Raziel to walk free, then he stared at the sky in deep thought. He shivered slightly, then he went back to planning out the base. 28 days passed, and the base was nearing completion. The majority of the architecture was in place, and facilities such as water and electricity were running independent. Bailey had built an underground hydroelectric dam that was linked to a water purification plant in the sewer systems. The massive amounts of diseased drinking water and toxic waste that had infested the water had been cleared away by the machine to remove the pollutants, break them down into subatomic molecules, then rearrange the atomic structure into that of vitamins and minerals that the townsfolk were slowly dying without. Dante and Raziel were tasked with figuring out what sewer gates led to the town's water supply, and then redirect their own water there. Although the importance of this mission was high, Dante was furious about having to wander around the sewers. "Why the hell do I have to do all the gross jobs?" he shouted. Raziel just stared at him for a moment before replying, "Because you're a narcissistic pretty boy. You cringe at the slightest thing that disrupts your self-image, such as being stuck in a sewer for fear of falling into the water, and so you're sent here to learn not to let your solar systemic ego be a priority. Instead, just get over it, get the job done." Dante was infuriated, so he tried to change the subject. "I don't see you willingly taking a dive into that water. I actually have a reason as to why I don't want to be here, and that reason is not that I don't want to tread in the water and get in my shoes, nor is it that I'm afraid of getting slime in my hair. The only reason I don't want to be stuck in a godforsaken sewer by myself is because I'm worried about something happening on the surface, and I won't be there to protect anybody if it comes to the worst." "Oh, you're so full of shit. You bloody well know that if something were to happen, Dad would take care of it, torch corpses to hide the evidence, life as we know goes back to normal, the world keeps on spinning. Vincent's just gonna crush everything underfoot. A positive Fang could use a change of diet. What about Brian, Luke and Bailey? Even if Dad, Fang and Vinny are in the case, they can't defend themselves like we can. They don't have mutant genetics. And Adele... Well, what about Adele? She has the skill of a warrior, but it's not in her heart. She's always been the weakest link in this chain, emotionally and physically, whether it's the fact that every sadistic bastard out there targets young women, or the fact that, as Dad said, her Nephilim blood makes her prone to danger. I don't know what you think of it, but it's difficult knowing who's at risk. You don't know what I think? I'll tell you what I think. You have a thing for Adele." Raziel stopped walking and stared at him. "Unlike you, Dante, I don't chase down every girl that walks past me. My feelings toward Adele are no more than that between siblings. We are her brothers, so stereotypically it's our God-given task to be at her side when she needs us. That's how I feel about everyone we know. Dad, Adele, Vincent, Fang, even you, despite the fact you're a vainglorious bastard who tries to change the subject when confronted about his ego." Dante stamped his foot on the ground and stormed into the distance with Raziel in close pursuit. Eventually the pair came across the closed gate, which was mainly a large metal plate that blocked the water, with small iron bars that held it in place. Raziel pulled a map out of his pocket and unfolded it. Dante then turned around and peered over Raziel to get a good look. "Are you sure this map is accurate?" he asked. "It must be," replied Raziel. "This is the number 3 gate. We passed number 2 back there. The one in this sector we need to open next is number 5, which acts as a bulkhead for 3 and 6. Where the hell's 4? That and gate 7 are between 3 and 5. They're already open. Before we open 5, we need to close 4 to redirect the clean water through 7, which leads to the water distribution plant. Then we close 5 of us inside like a box, and under the water is an emergency hatch. We will open it to drain the water. Then we can enter a tunnel that leads to the master control room. Then we can open all the gates with a flick of the switch, allowing the plant to redistribute clean water throughout town and even into the rivers. That simple. I hope your hair gel laced mind can handle it. Easy. Let's just hope Bailey's plan works." Raziel pointed at a valve next to the number 3 gate. One of us needs to open that manually with the valve, then the other one can squeeze through the gaps and use the valve on the other side. I'll stay here, said Dante. You're skinnier than I am, it'll be like trying to snuff out a tank. Raziel nodded in agreement and waited for Dante to turn the valve before he slipped through the gap. A few seconds later, the bars dropped into the water and disappeared. Dante went to turn the next valve, but it jammed. Raziel then leapt across the river of diseased water and tried to move the other valve, but they were all stuck. Raziel then stared down into the water. We're gonna have to skip straight to the master control room, he said. Once we can get there, we can just open the gates electronically like they are now, but the water's going to take a lot more time to redirect itself. Dante held a disgusted look on his face. Come on, shouted Raziel. I can't open the hatch by myself with that much water weighing it down. Dante almost cried at the thought, but he eventually dove into the water. Once he surfaced and spat out dirty water, he started glaring at Raziel. It's too muddy to see, he said. Raziel then dove down into the water next to Dante. I'll guide you to the handle, he said once he surfaced. Once you grab it, pull as hard as you can. Dante stared below himself. I hope to God this works, he said. The pair dove into the water and Raziel used his vision to locate the hatch. He grabbed Dante by the wrist and guided it to one of the handles. Once he latched on, Dante felt along his arm with his free hand until he felt the handle. Then he started pulling as hard as he can. Raziel then grabbed the other handle and pulled as hard as he could, and the two boys managed to open the hatch. But the sudden rush of water dragged them down. Raziel managed to latch onto a ladder and caught Dante just before he fell to his death. Just below them was a giant fan that threatened to make mincemeat. Jesus Christ, you're heavy, said Raziel. Thanks, replied Dante sarcastically. The hatch fell over the open hole and plugged it back up. The draining water fell into oblivion through the giant fan. Raziel let go of Dante, who grabbed onto a ladder rung further below, and the pair each clung to one side of the ladder and slid down, stamping their feet onto the bottom rung before jumping off. They landed in front of a door with a warning sign for high voltage pinned to it, and Dante reached into his hair and pulled out his katana. With one quick swipe, he cut the hinges clean off, and Raziel kicked down the door, entering a large room full of buttons, switches, and levers. Above them was a screen that had security feeds that watched what gates were open or closed. If only I was a year younger, commented Dante. I'd be all over those buttons like Seraphing on Cat. You mean a drooling mess that's horrific to look at? Asked Raziel. Exactly. Raziel studied the layout of the controls, and he pushed several buttons, redirecting the water as he had originally planned. We should get going, said Dante. I think I can hear a storm coming on the surface. Just 1 second, said Raziel as he pushed more buttons. All of the gates suddenly opened, completing their mission. Let's get going. Dante nodded. Raziel left the room and stared up at the hatch. Dante waited until Raziel's focus was directed fully away, then he reached out and pulled a massive red lever. As he did so, a warning siren started to blare. Dante! Raziel ran back into the room with a shocked expression on his face. What? Asked Dante casually. I didn't touch nothing. Outside, the giant fan spun around until it was blowing upwards instead of down, and a loud pop could be heard as the hatch was blown out of its spot. Raziel went back outside and saw that the fan was strong enough to force the water out of the way, and the hatch seemed stuck to the roof of the tunnel overhead. You're bloody lucky, he said. Dante let go of the switch, which started making a ticking noise as clockwork made it slowly return to its original position. Dante rushed up the ladder with Raziel in pursuit, and the pair only just made it out before the fan turned back around, causing the hatch to fall back to the ground and plug up the hole. Back on the solid platform, Dante began marching around proudly. You have no idea how lucky you are that was not the self-destruct initiative, said Raziel. Dante stopped and glared at his brother. You're just jealous I saved us from being trapped down there. I wonder where that fan led to though. At that point, a gurgling noise could be heard as the water that had drained earlier rushed through a pipe behind Dante, showering him in unholy grime. After the initial shock, Dante began growling loudly as Raziel laughed at him. The price of vanity, said the latter. Come on. The rain will wash that off, after about a week of it. Dante screamed and began to chase Raziel through the sewers in a fit of homicidal rage. Eventually, Raziel came across the entrance that he and Dante had used to enter the sewers and slipped inside. Watching as Dante ran past blindly, he then breathed a sigh of relief and exited the tunnel back outside. After some more walking, he exited another tunnel that led into the gutters just under the newly built base. He crawled up the banks of the gutter and began watching as the backwash that he and Dante caused flooded the gutter with crystal clear water. I see you were successful then, asked Bailey. Raziel turned around in shock of the sudden appearance. Where's Dante? asked Bailey. A loud menacing scream emitted from the tunnel. He got slimed, replied Raziel. How's your base going? Pretty much done. The others are unpacking their stuff now. You should go see your room. All three of you have your own wardrobes now, because it's so big. Raziel was intrigued and turned around to properly examine the colossal structure behind him. It looked like an exact replica of the original house, with faded yellow walls and a tin roof that was rusted. But it was 3 times larger apart from doors and windows, which were only increased by half the original area. Raziel walked over to an open window, where Vincent suddenly stepped up onto the windowsill. The window was large enough, and apparently stable enough, for Vincent to comfortably stand inside. Nice, commented Raziel. Now you can jump through the window like you've always wanted. Door's still too small, replied Vincent. Dad thinks about installing a window that acts like cat flap above doors so I can walk without bending over. Did somebody say cat? Called Saberfang's voice. The ground beneath Raziel erupted, and Saberfang burst out, knocking him over. It appeared that Saberfang was digging out areas for objects such as support beams, as his body was brown from the amount of dirt coating it. Where did you just come from? asked Raziel. The basement, replied Saberfang. Brian asked me to dig up a hole to put the flagpole. What flagpole? At that moment, Brian's voice could be heard coming from the bottom of Saberfang's tunnel. Fang, this is not what I meant by digging up a hole for the flagpole. Raziel was confused. What flagpole? He then turned around to see John, Luke and Adele carrying a very long and thick iron bar. Luke was at one end, while John and Adele were carrying the other end, which had a rolled up flag attached to a horizontal bar welded to the main pole, giving the entire piece the appearance of a crucifix. John and Luke were carrying their ends with relative ease over their shoulders, but Adele was struggling to keep the horizontal bar up with both arms. It ain't far now, girl, said John, who then looked at Vincent. We're gonna need you out here, Vin. Vincent jumped out of the window and landed beside Raziel. Adele let go of the pole where she stood and let Vincent grab on. Careful not to bend it, said John. It's too thick to bend, grunted Vincent. It's solid. John let go of the bar at his end as Vincent lifted the bar up over his head. However, Luke was too distracted by a tall blonde woman walking past, and he was lifted airborne as a result. Luke began kicking around frantically, and eventually lost his grip of the bar, and he crashed into the ground. Vincent then looked at John. Now what? He asked. Just stick it in the hole, replied John. Luke started laughing to himself. If only I had $1 every time I heard that. You'd still be broke, interrupted John. Luke said nothing, but walked inside to get out of the rain. Vincent strained under the bar's weight, but he finally managed to jump up as high as he could and throw the bar into the air. He fell through the hole perfectly straight, and then Brian's voice could be heard shouting again. Bloody hell! Whoever that fucking was, you nearly impaled me. Sorry, called Vincent. Brian crawled out of the hole, tightly squeezing in the gap between the flagpole and the surrounding dirt. Then he dusted himself off and looked up at the sky. Probably not safe to put the flag up yet, he said. The storm's getting bloody worse. Everybody murmured in agreement. Then at that moment, a hooded woman, with her head hung low, was walking up the driveway. Saberfang sensed hostility and began to growl deeply. Raziel also sensed a malicious intent from the intruder, and he began sneering. The woman stopped and stared at the motley crew before her. Greetings, she said in a dark voice. I'm a bounty hunter, come to collect the head of an escaped convict seen in this area. She held out a paper scroll, and it unfurled to reveal a picture of Luke's mugshot. I'm contacting everybody in town associated with him. Is he here? John drew the side of his cape back to reveal his large military knife strapped to his belt. Unless you see, you can have my blade shoved up your ass, he said. You're gonna find nothing here. However, before you depart with a hemorrhoid the size of the Daintree rainforest, you should know that I am an honourable warrior who requires his opponent's name before they die a slow and excruciating death. The bounty hunter did not seem impressed by John's idle threat. In many states of the world, she said, I am known as the Rain Dancer. Wherever I may go, a venomous squall follows in the wake of my sword art. John scoffed. Is that so? The glint of my drawn blade can pierce the thickest storm clouds. Then I would like you to prove it. My many little birds have told me that my victim hides here, and I'm not dissuaded in killing the rest of you if it means finally claiming the reward for the black man's head. The Rain Dancer lifted up her head to reveal her face, and in a hairstyle similar to Raziel's, the right side of her face was hidden by a thick tuft of dark blue hair. John drew his scythe and whacked the flagpole with its shaft. Like a military war banner, a flag representing the Aboriginal people descended from where it was fixed. John then began uttering a curse in a foreign dialect, which Raziel translated to, Your nature brings disgrace to my people. May your ancestors in the condemned dominion suffer the wrath of mine in the celestial kingdom. The Rain Dancer threw off her hooded cloak to reveal that she was wearing leather armour similar to John's, except that it had also been dyed blue. Her hair seemed naturally red, with a blue streak running through it. It's a chick? Asked Brian in a surprised tone. Bailey quickly grabbed a sledgehammer with his right hand and softly bounced Hammerhead off his left palm menacingly. Luke, who was watching the entire thing, grabbed a fire axe and leapt out of the window, swinging it about to get a feel for the weight. Brian unsheathed his sacrificial dagger from his belt and tossed it into the air, before catching and wielding it in a stance similar to a fencer. Saberfang reared back on his hind legs and growled with his tail in the air, while Vincent began punching his open palm. Adele raised her fists up like a boxer, with a glaive in its ready position on the bracer, while John simply swept the scythe behind him. Raziel took his blade in his hand and just crossed his arms. Then the Rain Dancer began to laugh, as if the battle poses were for comedic effect. She then pulled two stiletto daggers out of her belt, stretching her right arm out in front of her with the dagger pointing to her right, while her left arm was out in the same direction with the dagger pointing down. Her left leg shifted far behind her as she crouched to attack. You wouldn't hit a girl, would you? She taunted in an almost flirting tone. Is this what you would call honourable? John thought about it for a moment, then he stood normally, holding his scythe in the ground like a staff. You got a point there, he said. All of us against you? That wouldn't be fun. Adele, go. Adele turned to John and nodded before turning back to the Rain Dancer. She took the glaive off of the bracer and held it with her fingers wrapped around the hole in the middle, like a large shuriken. She knelt down in a fashion that mimicked the Rain Dancer, except that her right arm was holding her knee, while her left arm held the glaive behind her. The two girls proceeded to circle each other in their current positions until 2.5 rotations had been made. Then, Adele charged first with a sweeping motion that barely missed. The Rain Dancer dodged and countered by scratching Adele's arm with the tip of one of her daggers. The two fought to a standstill, artfully dodging each other's attacks, until Adele entered a sudden convulsion and collapsed, trembling on the ground. What's this? She whispered in a panicked tone. Then she suddenly fell over, barely breathing. Sudden confusion gripped the others, as Adele had only received a single scratch. There was only one way a wound like that would have been terminal, and Raziel clicked onto it. Poison, he sneered. Dirty trick. From a dirty bitch, added John. The Rain Dancer gave an evil smile that unnerved the group. It's almost funny, is it not? She asked, how fast it reacts to the bloodstream. Once it reaches the lungs, the airways tighten like a python. Once it reaches the heart, one suffers cardiac arrest. Once it reaches the brain, it begins shutting down the flesh and paralyzing the body. Eventually, the vital organs began to die, one by one. Such a fragile slave to man. She will not last much longer. Rage entered Raziel's mind, and the glare of his evil eye brightened until the glow was visible through his hair. The bandage from around his eye fell to the ground, and a large hole smouldered like dying embers that burned away at the cloth, never ceasing, even in damp. Fear not, though, continued the Rain Dancer. She's not conscious enough to suffer. John reassumed his battle pose. If that's your sense of honor, then I can't take this easy on you. Attack! 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 Everybody charged at the Rain Dancer, but she was too fast for any of them to strike or elude. In the end, only John was capable of resisting the poison's effects, even though it left him in a stupor. Leaping gracelessly into the air, he spun around with his scythe outstretched. The Rain Dancer jumped backwards to avoid the main blade, but with the distance of her jump, combined with the momentum of John's current movement, the re-spike made a large gash and punctured her side. The friction of the leather armor and the muscles closing in on the cold steel held fast to the blade. Then John sneered as he finally found a moment to invoke critical damage. Using his scythe as a lever, he swung the scythe overhead in a circle before slamming the Rain Dancer into the ground. Then with one swift movement, he threw the scythe at the flagpole, sending her crashing headfirst into the solid iron bar. The force of impact pushed the scythe out with a kidney attached. Then John picked up the scythe with his left hand and plucked off the kidney with his right, squeezing it tightly and allowing the mess to ooze between his fingers. The Rain Dancer began to scream in agony as if her heart was being crushed by a voodoo curse. John then knelt down and addressed her. "Not so smart now, are you, bitch?" he said. The Rain Dancer jumped up and took John by surprise with a combination leg sweep and somersault kick that sent him flying into the air. She ran up the flagpole to John's elevation, then jumped off, kicking him in the spine with both feet before falling to the ground. At that moment, Dante suddenly emerged from the gutter tunnel, still covered in slime and cursing Raziel. He looked to the sky with a sigh of relief and allowed the flowing water and pouring rain to wash him clean, instantly removing his anger with a big grin on his face. He then heard a painful yell trail through the air, and looked up to see John fly straight into a passing car. The driver was shocked and sped off immediately, running John over in the process. Dante then ran up the bank and onto the road to find John in a state of perpetual hell. "Who did this?" he growled. John began pointing across the yard. "Rain Dancer, bitch," he said before he collapsed. Dante looked over at the Rain Dancer, who was holding a metal flask. She held it over her head and poured a milky, viscous fluid down her throat. Once the flask was apparently empty, she began feeling at her wounds, and despite the amount of blood loss and mental shock, she appeared fully refreshed and ready to butcher an entire village. Dante pressed his katana against his hip as if it were in a sheath, and he was ready to quickly draw it in Bushido combat style. He jumped over the fence in a single bound and faced the Rain Dancer. "The ace enters the field," he gloated as he whipped the katana around his body like a pair of nunchucks. The Rain Dancer assumed her pose and laughed at Dante. Poor boy," she taunted. "You're nothing." Dante's free hand grabbed the katana on the blade right next to the hilt guard, and he held it in front of his face with both hands, blade facing upward. He pretended to unsheath the sword slowly until most of the blade had passed through his fingers, at which point he quickly swept it down in the blink of an eye, so that the point gently rested upon the grass. He then slowly moved into a pose, with the blade facing towards the sky and pointed at its intended victim. He then also made a small crouch like the Rain Dancers, and he made a step forward, not back. Dante dashed forward and nearly took off the Rain Dancer's head in a clean swipe, but the only casualty was a single red hair. The two lunged at each other, successfully blocking each other's blows with their weapons. "I have to admit," said the Rain Dancer, "you're quite the swordsman." Dante blocked another blow and leapt into the air with a backflip, landing a distance away from the Rain Dancer. He then motioned with his hand, an invite to come closer. "You know it, babe," he said. The Rain Dancer smiled at Dante and attempted to use his ego against him. "You're so handsome, you know. It's a shame you have to die." Dante was not swayed, but decided to act a part by stopping and staring at the skull while stroking his chin. You really think so? Yeah, I really know so. The Rain Dancer charged forward and attempted to stab Dante with both daggers, but he called her bluff and dodged out of the way. His counterattack caught the back of her armor and snapped off with the backwards point on his hip. Underneath appeared to be a sort of schoolgirl uniform with a strange icon over the chest, but Dante did not have time to study it. As he stepped backward to prepare for the next attack, Dante slipped over and fell into the mud. He then saw one of the Rain Dancer's daggers flying towards him, and he was unable to react fast enough. Suddenly, Adele's blade whizzed through the air and sniped the dagger out of the air, knocking it away. Dante turned to see Adele staggering to her feet, much to the Rain Dancer's shock. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. "Not yet, I'm not," said Adele as she poised her arm in the air, twirling her wrist around. A bright orb of holy energy appeared in the palm of her hand. Then she clenched her fist and shattered the orb, causing waves of energy to pour out and cure the others of their poison. Adele suddenly went straight for the Rain Dancer and kicked her other dagger out of her hand, forcing her to fight barehanded. The two girls engaged in an all-out brawl, trying to rip each other apart like savages. John then leapt over the fence, spinning his scythe over his head, and the opal set inside it glowed. John then thrust his scythe like a spear, and Dante was sent flying through the air, high over the yard. In a burst of grey-coloured light, Dante floated back down to earth, posing as if the light of God was shining upon him. His arms were slightly raised, but lowered at his sides, and his unopened gaze never left the skies above as the clouds billowed around him. Two thick strands of Dante's hair raised and floated over his face on either side of his temple, and at the end of each strand was a large quartz bead. The hair was tied into a knot above and below to prevent the bead from falling off, and just below the knot was a small length of hair left untouched, like a small ponytail. Dante hovered just a few meters above the ground, with his black wings outstretched as far as possible. He then landed with his right arm against his side, and his left resting his sword upon the grass. "You might be the Rain Dancer," he said, "but I am the Blade Dancer." Dante rushed forward as if he were about to slash at the Rain Dancer, but then he suddenly turned into a puff of smoke that quickly dissipated. At that moment, a noise that sounded like the clang of two swords striking sounded along a flash of light. The Rain Dancer noticed that her arm was bleeding heavily, and she started to panic. Suddenly, another flash and clang tossed her into the air. Dante seemed to appear as clouds that appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye each time he appeared. And each time he appeared, the Rain Dancer was thrown across the yard. The sudden onslaught finally reached its end, and the Rain Dancer was left in a panic. She then pointed and yelled at Adele, "It's all your fault to begin with. You're dead, bitch." Suddenly, a cloud dropped upon the Rain Dancer, like dust falling out of a vacuum bag, and a small tornado sprouted up from the ground and threw her into the air. Dante appeared with a puff of smoke in the position where he was squatting in midair, with his sword between his knees and pointed towards the ground. Dante fell at an amazing speed, with his head trailing behind him like a lightning bolt striking the earth in slow motion, and the tornado suddenly faded away, causing the Rain Dancer to fall back to earth. Just before she impacted the ground, Dante caught up and impaled the girl with his katana, lifting her up just high enough for her feet to be dangling just above the grass. He then whispered in her ear, "I know you are, but what is she?" Then he slowly pushed the blade deep through her heart and twisted it around to shatter her ribcage. Dante listened carefully as the last groans left the girl's body. He then wrapped his left hand around her throat and shushed her softly. He held her up and strangled her as he slowly pulled out his sword, leaving a gaping hole in her chest wide enough to see through. He placed the blade of his sword at the right angle just so it rested gently underneath the Rain Dancer's ponytail. With a swift flick of the wrist, Dante snapped the neck, and the jerking movement of the ponytail caused it to press hard enough against the ridiculously sharp blade that it was cut off. Dante dropped the corpse to the ground and nudged it with his foot so that she was lying prone on her back. Dante then stabbed his katana into the ground and knelt down, holding on to the sword like a walking stick, so that he could gently close the girl's still open eyes, watching as the blood spread as if the grass was drinking it up and taking on a crimson hue as a result. The clouds darkened and the rain eased as Adele walked up, clutching his wounds, and he examined the corpse. So young to be involved in such a business, he said. The way she fought was inhuman. Somehow, somewhere, there must have been something that turned her into something evil. Dante reached into the girl's pocket and pulled out a silver flask. He flicked open the cap and smelled fluid inside, then pulled it away from him in disgust. "Fucking hell, I'd rather eat dog food again," he commented, before standing up and walking inside, taking the flask and his sword with him. Seconds later, Adele knelt down in his place and examined the symbol on the uniform. It appeared to be a crow with a thin knife, just like the stiletto dagger she used, impaling it from the tail to the head. "I've seen this somewhere," she said, "but I can't put my finger on it." Raziel motioned for Adele to step back, and once she was at a safe distance away, he took out one of his sickle blades and sliced off the cloth with the symbol on it. He then stepped back from the corpse and used his shadow magic to engulf her in blue and black flame. Raziel wiped sweat and dirt from his face, and the hair covering his eye was thrown up long enough for the light emitted from the flame to make a sinister gleam in both of his eyes. "After all the pain she has given us," he said, "and God knows how many others, I hope she gets everything she deserves in perdition." Raziel walked away, seemingly rather distant, and everyone else followed him soon after. Adele was the last person to enter the house, and as she shut the door, she glanced one last time outside to witness the fires dying in the rain. And that was chapter 6. Fuck, I'm tired. Now, while most of you will be expecting me to do a segment on the enigmatic rain dancer character, I find there's going to be very little points, as I'm going to explain shortly. Quick note, some references in chapter 6, chapters 5 and 6, mainly involved the passing of 28 days between the groups beginning to tear down the house and finally completing it. That's a reference to the movie 28 Days Later. The scene where Dante eats dog food actually comes from a cult classic TV show called Red Dwarf. Main character Dave Lister is stranded on an ice planet and he has to choose between eating dog food or eating pot noodles, and he absolutely detests pot noodles. The conversation Raziel and Dante share is somewhat similar to the conversation shared between Lister and other character Arnold Rimmer about Lister eating dog food, as well as Dante's snide comments about why Sam Fang licks his own bulbs.
And you can take that look off your face like I'm doing something disgusting. I'm just trying to stay alive.
You're going to eat the dog food?
Yeah. I haven't eaten for 6 days. I'm going to eat the dog food.
I'm sure the dog food will be lovely.
Remember, this isn't dog food. This is a piece of prime fillet steak in blue cheese sauce. It's been charcoal broiled in garlic butter and is going to taste delicious. 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 Well, now I can see why dogs lick their testicles.
Music used in this episode. Opening of chapter 5, Find Your Way from Final Fantasy VIII makes its return. While defending the house, the boss theme from Final Fantasy IX makes its first appearance. The opening of chapter 6, Phantom Forest from Final Fantasy VI, makes its first appearance as well. Once Raziel finally emerges back to the surface and talks to Bailey, the main theme from Final Fantasy VII returns. When the Rain Dancer initiates combat with Adele, combat theme from American Mcgees' Alice Madness Returns appears. I don't think it was mentioned at all by either me or Bandit1569 in the credits section, but it actually played during the prologue. when John first faced the three cultists and became the Arcanist. During the scene where Dante becomes the Blade Dancer and kills the Rain Dancer, I actually used an excerpt from One-Winged Angel, fan favourite from Final Fantasy VII, although this actually came from the Advent Children version, which has a rock beat. This references Dante being based off of Sephiroth, and while Sephiroth's theme is originally those chosen by the planet, everybody thinks that One-Winged Angel is his theme song. Kind of stupid. I mean, do your research. God. Finally, in the short aftermath, Promise from Silent Hill 2 begins to play. Okay, so next time on Hell's Crusade, while contemplating the strange nature of the Rain Dancer, Jordan suddenly receives a call, and what it regards could mean life or death for the family, and Jack as well. What does the great evil on the horizon have to do with the mysterious Saberfang? Until next time, I am Necro Arcanist XIII in association with Bandit 1569. Stay classy.